So I want to move on to a cautionary engineering tale for you today. Scientists and engineers have a bad habit. It's called overpromising. The military-industrial complex is no exception, and each arms manufacturer is tempted to exaggerate the capabilities of its proposal in order to win the competition for an eye-wateringly large government contract, and it's often the most exaggerated concept that wins the bid. Then, once the project underdelivers and the costs overrun, the state has no choice but to keep shoveling your money into the canard. So if you're in government, you would do well to remember the ancient maxim, beware of geeks bearing gifts. So if we go to yesterday's news, we have this here. A British F-35 stealth jet has crashed shortly after takeoff from the UK's flagship aircraft carrier, forcing the pilot to eject into the Mediterranean. The F-35 jets are the most prized part of the UK's new carrier strike group. The British and American jets have flown to intercept Russian aircraft from HMS Queen Elizabeth in recent months. The aircraft carrier is returning to the UK after more than 7 months at sea on a maiden voyage to the Far East and back. The jets on board have conducted around 2,000 takeoffs and landings during that time. So just to keep things in proportion here, the F-35 is an operational jet fighter, and I wouldn't want one coming to bomb my house. But it does have serious problems, and that's what we're going to get into. So if we go to the next slide, this is the Metro's take on this. Ever eager to inject some drama into this fairly routine military failure, they are worried that the Russians might get to the sea floor. If we can scroll down to the map on this article, John. So if you can look on there, can you see Russia on that map? Yeah, I can't either. So for those of you who are just listening, the incident happened just north of the Egyptian coast. So if the Russians are ready to snatch a fighter plane from the bottom of the sea, then we have more to worry about than their airplane technology. This incident has prompted questions about the safety of the jet, as the UK has another 138 on order for £9.1 billion. These things are not cheap.
They're very expensive.
So it turns out that if you haven't heard of the F-35 before, it has a long and controversial development history. If we go on to the next, with a development history dating back as far as 1995, the F-35's designation is Multi-Role Joint Strike Fighter. It's not a dogfighter, a plane that would shoot other planes out of the sky. It's supposed to do everything. The F-35 finally won that defence contract in 2001, which kick-started full-scale development. Many different roles have been crammed into its remit, and this is where the engineering over-promising just gets ridiculous. It has short takeoff and vertical landing variants. It has carrier-based variants. It has conventional takeoff variants. It's a warplane and it's a stealth plane. It has ground attack capability and it has air-to-air capability. And after today's news, they may now be adding submarine capability. It has groundbreaking electronics, and it's the first fighter to have no heads-up display, relying on its next-generation helmet-mounted display. In a sense, this brief is a technology nerd's dream, but it doesn't make for a good fighter.
Well, from what you were just describing there, it does sound like they are promising it will do everything, but the more you promise that something will do, the more you are opening up for everything to go wrong.
Exactly. I don't know if the engineers who came up with the concept in 1995 are still working on this, or if they've managed to wash their hands and drift into peaceable retirement, but they've certainly put a stinker in the laps of today's technologists. This was pitched as a replacement for the F-16, the F-22 Raptor, the F-18 Hornet, and the A-10 Warthog. All in all, they wanted to replace 6 different aircraft variants with just this one plane. And the cherry on top is that they said, as they always do, that it would be a cost-saving project.
£9.1 billion cost-saving.
Well, that's just what the British have paid. The American cost is in the hundreds of billions.
I think certain.
Yeah, I do have it, but... Yeah, so then we move on to the next thing, which is a recent report that the F-35 is a failure.
The government sank tons of money into something that turned out to be a failure.
Where have we heard that before?
Well, let me get the list out.
So if we scroll down to a quote from military commentators, to say the F-35 has failed to deliver on its goals would be an understatement. This is quite long, but it's also savage and very on point, so I'm going to read it in full.
Go on.
Its mission-capable rate is 69%. below the 80% benchmark set by the military. 36% of the F-35 fleet is available for any required mission, well below the required 50% standard. Current and ongoing problems include faster than expected engine wear, transparency delamination of the cockpit, and unspecified problems with the F-35's power module. There have been so many problems with the F-35, it's difficult even to summarize them. Pilot blackouts, premature part failures, software development disasters, and more have all figured in various documents over the years. Firing the main gun can crack the plane. The Air Force has already moved to buy new F-15EX aircraft, a different variant.
Okay.
Multiple partner nations that once promised F-35 buys have shifted orders to other planes, and can you blame them? The US Air Force continues to insist that it will purchase 1,763 aircraft, but the odds of it actually doing so are increasingly dubious. The F-15EX costs an estimated $20,000 per hour to fly. The F-35 runs at $44,000. Lockheed Martin has promised to bring that cost down to $25,000, but it's been promising that for years. Former Air Force pilots have not been kind in their recent evaluations of the aircraft's performance and capabilities.
For all intents and purposes, that just sounds to me like an unmitigated disaster. Not just a failure, a disaster.
Yes.
You can't fire the gun without cracking the plane.
You would think that that's a pretty big problem,
Yeah.
but it gets worse.
Oh.
If we move on to the next slide, it still has 7 critical flaws. As the F-35 program inches its way through operational testing, the number of critical technical deficiencies is slowly dwindling, dropping from 11 in January to 7 in July. SEAL noted that all remaining critical deficiencies are classified as Category 1B issues, which represent a critical impact on mission readiness, which is good because the more serious Category 1A is problems that indicate a risk to the operator's life. So
Okay.
they've set themselves a pretty low bar for success here.
So it doesn't immediately blow up on takeoff. We've got room for improvement here, lads.
And just to give you an idea of what the some of the remaining deficiencies are, there is a technical problem involving the F-35's cockpit pressure regulation system, which led to several incidents of extreme sinus pain or barotrauma. In April 2020, the program office believed it would be able to resolve the problem in 2021 after flight testing the fix, but we don't yet know if they've been able to. On nights with little ambient light, the night vision camera embedded in the F-35 helmet could display horizontal green lines that could make it more difficult for pilots to land on ships. So just a heads up, we're going to start seeing UFO reports of horizontal green craft being spotted by F-35 pilots in the near future. And finally, the F-35's Northrop Grumman-made AN/APG-81 active electronically scanned array radar meets requirements. Hooray. But the Navy wants to upgrade the system so that it can scan a wider area while in sea search mode to remain competitive. In 2020, the program office stated that this issue would remain on the books until 2024, when a software update is made to the aircraft's avionics equipment.
This is just a grand case of the sunken cost fallacy, if I've ever seen it. It's failed so much. Let's just keep going. Just keep going. We need to make it work.
4 years for a software update is pretty bad, I think I would say. But that's just the critical deficiencies, because it turns out there are many more. We move to the next slide. In January, the F-35 had 871 flaws. Only 2 fewer than a year earlier.
We're getting there, lads.
Lockheed Martin Corps' F-35 remains marred by 871 software and hardware deficiencies that could undercut readiness, missions, or maintenance, according to the Pentagon's testing office. Lockheed has delivered or is under contract for 970 aircraft of a potential 3,200 or more planes for the US and other nations. The assessment outlining the seemingly intractable roster of flaws provides the incoming Biden administration, this is from a while ago, with a primer on the $398 billion F-35 program that retains strong backing in Congress and from overseas purchasers despite its problems. So who is operating this plane and why? There is a map here. This is all of the operators. It's already been delivered to and in use by the US, the UK, Australia, and Israel. Other adopters are Japan, Turkey, Belgium, Italy, Norway, Netherlands, United Arab Emirates, Poland, Italy, and Denmark in rough order of the size of their deal. For all of these countries, the F-35 is a massive investment of public money. Planes, especially jet fighters, do not come cheap.
Yes.
In fact, if there's anything that's more expensive than a private jet, it would seem to be a public jet. So the success or failure of this project directly impacts the strategic military capability of the entire Western Alliance. So we move on to the next slide. It turns out the UK has slashed its F-35B order by 65%. So there is some good news.
Oh, good.
An order for 90 more F-35 Lightning combat jets is to be cancelled in favour of the Tempest fighter, built in Lancashire, while 24 older Typhoon fighters will be retired early. Whole fleets of aircraft will be taken out of service as drones become ever more common.
Oh, okay.
Moving on to the review of UK defence plans. In his Munich speech, Johnson said, "We do not wish to live in a world of unchecked rivalry or decoupling, nor are we concerned solely with trade. The UK has shown that we will defend our values as well as our interests." Now that's actually a statement from Boris that I can get behind. It's only when he fails to live up to literally anything he says that I start rolling my eyes. Following the disappointment of the F-35, the UK is developing its own fighter, which is good news. The Tempest, in collaboration with Sweden and Italy, and potentially with Japan. Moving on to the next slide. In the Tempest, £2 billion were initially invested by the UK, but it will need upwards of $20 billion to complete. These are long-term, expensive projects. I'd just like to point out that if Japan could be put on board, I think that's a very sensible idea and could be a windfall for the development of this project. It turns out, however, that military hardware is very controversial in Japan, which has the world's fifth most powerful military, despite not having a military.
I was not aware of such.
Yes, so Japan has a defense force.
Oh, okay.
There was a constitutional provision following the Second World War which prevented them from having a proper military. So they have built themselves a military and called it a defense force, but it is mired in various political scandals and controversies. It's a good fun read if you want to get into it. A competitor to the Tempest is out there, which is the Franco-German-Spanish project called SCAF, French for Future Combat Air System, but it's struggling. France's defence industry, by the way, is not looking too good at the moment, following the engineering failures that led to Australia cancelling its submarine contract. Maybe they can get F-35s instead, we'll see.
Oh, God.
And just to summarise that Australian deal in the next slide, an Australian spokesman said, France should not have been surprised that Australia cancelled the submarine contract, as major concerns about delays, cost overruns and suitability had been aired officially and publicly for years. Australian politicians said. They would have to have their eyes shut not to realise the danger they were facing, said Rex Patrick, an independent senator from South Australia. France having its eyes shut is not a new thing. There was an incident, I believe, in 1940 that caught them rather by surprise. But just to briefly summarise this article, so arms manufacturers overpromise with your money. Beware of geeks bearing gifts. It ends up with a buggy, expensive mess. And the Tempest is a plane to watch for both military and economic reasons going forward.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters, you can catch us live 1 p.m. UK time on our website. And if you'd like more from us, you can also subscribe to find some of our premium content.
Yeah, we actually have absolutely loads on there now because we're over a year old at this point. So we've got a massive library of content that you can't find anywhere else, such as our regular series, which are Contemplations and Epochs. Contemplations, we have philosophical and scientific discussions. And in Epochs, we have long, in-depth conversations about things that happen in history. This is one we did recently about the Nika riots, the absolutely brutal Nika riots in Constantinople. I really enjoyed doing myself. But we also have access to, we also have loads of expert articles from people who know what they're talking about, such as this one talking about the misnomer of postmodern neo-Marxism. You may well remember Jordan Peterson getting castigated by left-wing activists for using the phrase. Well, it is a bit of a misnomer, but Thomas happens to be an expert in this subject, and so he takes you through it. And as you can see, there is a silver and gold tier member audio track that goes along with it. So if you don't want to have to read it, you can just listen to it instead. But we also have a bunch of premium podcasts that we can't really host on YouTube because of editorial guidelines, shall we say, such as Harry doing this excellent one, What Happened to the January 6th Rioters, and another one, in fact, that Harry and myself did about a whistleblower from a German public broadcaster talking about the COVID coverage and the particularly engineered narrative in which they can't talk about certain things. And so this leaves a bunch of questions up in the air, and we explore that. Again, editorial guidelines mean we can't really host that elsewhere. We also have a bunch of really excellent interviews. I did one recently with a chap called Philip Tanza. He's if you're a men's rights activist, you may have heard of him because he comes out of that space, but he's also an ex-gay porn star who's turned conservative activist who has some very interesting opinions.
Very interesting trajectory to take.
Yeah, it's the sort of person you're probably not going to meet in your regular life, but he's a fascinating guy. He's a really nice chap. And also, follow us on alternative media because, of course, we want to break the stranglehold of Silicon Valley over everything that we do. And this means that follow us on platforms like Getter, where you can follow Lotus_com to get all the latest updates from us. And also, we are speaking, or I am speaking, at a conference hosted by Getter at the London O2, the Indigo section of the London O2 on December the 8th. I'll be speaking there as it's part of the Counterculture conference, where we're talking about why what is happening to the West is happening and what we can do about it. So part of that is following us on Getter and coming and see us, and of course, subscribe because that keeps everything running.